Hi everyone, welcome to Sunny Day Discussions. I am Sunny Day, and today I want to go over a topic that I've already covered in a previous video, but I think it's important that we keep bringing it to people's attention, that we keep discussing it, so that we're all aware of what is actually happening and the progress that it's made. So I'm going to talk about genocide and how it is currently happening towards the transgender community, partially towards the entirety of the LGBTQ plus community, but they're targeting transgender people. Now, the first stage is classification. Differences between people are not respected. Divisions of us and them are carried out using stereotypes or excluding people who are perceived to be different. Now, obviously, the GOP views the LGBTQ plus community as different. And they really think that the transgender community is different. And that's why that's who is suffering the brunt of their targetization towards, if that's even a word, towards a group. Now, number 2 is symbolization. A visual manifestation of hatred. Jews were, in Nazi Europe, were forced to wear a yellow star to show that they were different. Now, the GOP hasn't actually come up with or assigned a symbol, but they are trying to bastardize the pride flag. And it shows in the fact that when a member of the GOP, the voters, see a pride flag hanging in like a store or even a state building, anything like that, usually even just during Pride Month, it's not like it's a year-round thing, it makes them feel anger and hatred. And while they would not admit it, fear of the other. And that's exactly what the GOP wants. That's their goal. Now, the next thing, stage 3, is discrimination. The dominant group denies civil rights or even citizenship to identified groups. The 1935 Nuremberg Law basically stripped away any German citizenship from Jewish people. It made holding down certain jobs illegal, as well as marrying a German who is not Jewish. Now, obviously that one's pretty blatant in the fact that the GOP is trying to take away, and has succeeded in many states, of taking away any sort of gender-affirming care, whether it be mental or physical, anything like that. They've stripped it away, and it started with kids because, save the children, all that crap. But it's moved on to adults. Like, for instance, in Florida, when they issued a statement saying that, or a legislation that nurse practitioners could no longer provide gender-affirming care to the transgender community, well, it turns out that nurse practitioners provided 80% or more of care to the transgender community. So essentially, it was banning gender-affirming care to adults. So the next is organization. And genocides are always planned. The regimes of hatred often train those who go on to carry out the destruction of a people. This is a little bit more subtle to identify, but by the constant rhetoric against the transgender community, by the constant keywords, the groomers, the pedophiles, children, all of that, they are brainwashing, basically, their base into a hatred and a fear of the transgender community, all based on non-factual information intended to just incite fear and disgust and hatred among their supporters. And that can manifest in many different ways. It has manifested in violence and death. But thus far, that's not the predominant manifestation. It's been more verbal assaults, protesting any sort of pride event, drag queen story hours, anything like that. And those have gotten violent. And it's escalating. Don't get me wrong. It's definitely escalating. So we need to be aware and watch and be safe. Now, number 6 is polarization. Propaganda begins to spread by hate groups. The Nazis used newspapers to spread their propaganda and lies, whereas the GOP is now using social media and actual news, or what they call themselves news, like Fox and Newsmax. And it's a little bit more efficient now because of the widespread access to the information. And of course, it's just pushing their lies, propaganda, the scare tactics, the key phrases of save the children, groomer, pedophile, that instills and stokes a sense of anger and hatred and fear in their base. I know some of this seems repetitive and redundant, but it's happening. Now, number 7 is preparation. Perpetrators plan the genocide. They use euphemisms such as the Nazi phrase, the final solution, to cloak their intentions. They create fear of the victim group, building up armies and weapons. Now, it can be argued that Make America Great Again is a cloaked euphemism because it seems that their great America that they're striving for is cis, white, straight, and Christian. And no other ethnicity, group, sexuality, race, whatever matters. So it can definitely be argued that MAGA is a cloaked euphemism, just like the final solution. And now, number 8 is persecution. Victims are identified because of their ethnicity or religion, and in this case, sexuality or sexual orientation, identity. And death lists are drawn up, sometimes separated into ghettos, deported, or starved, and property is often expropriated, and genocidal massacres begin. We're not to the stage of ghettos, obviously, but we are at the stage of lists. There are many attorney generals in red states who have demanded lists of anyone in their state who has sought gender-affirming care. And not just a list of names, their entire medical record. And they're not stopping there. They want access to anyone who leaves their state to access this care in a place that's legal. They want a list from them as well, so that they can have that list of everyone who resides in that state and has sought gender-affirming care. What they want to do with that list remains to be seen, but the lists are there. And it's frightening, and we all need to be aware. And number 9 is extermination. The hate group murders their identified victims in deliberate and systemic campaign of violence. And like I said, it's not there, not on a mass scale anyway. There's individual attacks, individual assaults, murders, verbal assaults. It's happening, just not on a mass scale yet, and not in a supremely organized way. It's more of an individual basis. But they are working towards more of a mass assault with groups like the Proud Boys, Patriot Front, the 3%ers. They're all showing up at drag queen story hours and pride events and harassing the supporters of those events. And it just seems like it's just going to be a matter of time before the tensions get to a point where they boil over and it turns into mass violence. Now, the final stage of genocide is denial. The perpetrators, or later generations, deny the existence of any crime. Now, the GOP has worded their legislation in such a way that it gives them deniability. They are able to deny that, no, their ultimate goal is not to eliminate the LGBTQ plus community. We just want to keep the children safe. So we're going to limit their access to their civil rights. But isn't that exactly the same thing? You're just wording it in a way that gives you deniability. They are literally legislating or attempting to legislate a group of people out of existence, or legislate them back into the closet. So we are currently at stage 8 of genocide, and we need to be aware, and we need to be safe. And let's go back to the pride flag, the rainbow, because it's so triggering to Christians. Christians are upset because a rainbow was given to the people as a promise from God not to commit genocide, basically. He committed genocide of the majority of the animals and people on this planet. And now those children of God who claim to walk in his shadow, to live the righteous life, are perpetrating a genocide onto the transgender community. And if they're not actively perpetrating, they're in support of that mass genocide. Now, a lot of them may not be aware of what's actually happening. They might just be having been brainwashed, hearing those keywords, those trigger words that make you just angry, like groomer, because no one wants to see any harm happen to any child. So the GOP has figured out that if they claim that the transgender community and the drag queens are after the children, it will incite fear, which then incites violence. And then carrying out the violent part of the genocide. And the politicians can then keep their hands clean and say, hey, free speech. And that was their choice that they went ahead and did that, but we had nothing to do with it. Now, let's move on to a different topic. It's not quite as horrible, but it's still concerning. So let's go down to Florida. Florida has effectively banned advanced placement psychology courses in high schools because of the LGBTQ plus lessons within that course. Now, the State Department of Education has informed the College Board that teaching foundational content on sexual orientation and gender identity is illegal under the new state law, the Don't Say Gay bill. So the state moves to restrict the advanced placement psychology courses, and that comes just months after they banned advanced placement African American studies. So there was some pushback, and so the state kind of started to walk back, and they reached a compromise between the College Board and the State Department of Education. And that is essentially that, okay, yeah, you can teach about LGBTQ plus issues and gender identity, but it has to be at a level that's age appropriate, as if that wasn't happening already. So if they had followed through and made it a mandatory thing statewide, they would be doing a huge disservice to their children. They already are, to be honest. The children in Florida, if they decide to go to college in a different state, are going to be so far behind and so misinformed that it's going to be hard for them to keep up. Now, if this was a statewide mandatory ban, it would also do a tremendous amount of damage to the LGBTQ plus community, because that's an entire generation of potential psychologists that will no longer have any knowledge of the LGBTQ plus community and therefore be unable to help anyone in the LGBTQ plus community. And probably that's their ultimate goal. Luckily, because of the pushback, there are certain schools and school districts that are going to continue on with the ban, but others can just kind of adapt their course and not go into as much depth, I guess. Anyway, so of course, that's Florida. Now, let's move on to Texas, because it's Texas, and why not? A state judge in Travis County ruled that abortions in Texas are lawful in cases of dangerous pregnancy complications, including fatal fetal diagnosis, and that doctors cannot be prosecuted for using good faith judgment on when to terminate a pregnancy. This is brought on by the women who are suing the state of Texas because of their essential ban on abortions. And then, of course, the Republicans in Texas, because this is their thing, within hours of that ruling, filed an accelerated appeal to the Supreme Court. And until that is addressed, then the mandate that the judge in Travis County said about abortion being legal except for is basically halted. Now, Republicans claim that it wasn't the politicians that put these women in danger. It was the doctors' faults because they could not interpret the law well enough. But they intentionally worded it so vaguely that no one could interpret it, and it would make it so that doctors were afraid to provide the care that was necessary because there is such hefty fines and punishments for doctors who perform abortions. So they were, in essence, trying to ban it completely, but trying to placate the people who are pro-choice by saying there are exceptions, but keeping it so vague that there really weren't exceptions. So there's that, of course. And then the largest school district in Texas, because we're staying in Texas, announced that they will be eliminating school libraries and replacing them with disciplinary centers. Librarians and social media specialist positions in 28 schools will be eliminated. Teachers at these schools will soon have the option to send misbehaving students to these discipline centers, where they will continue learning via remote learning. Now, the state announced that it was going to take over the school district in 2023-24 due to poor academic performance. Because, yeah, it makes sense to eliminate access to knowledge in order to improve academic performance. I don't know what kind of logic that is, but that's their justification for it, I guess. So maybe they think that if kids were better behaved, they would learn better. How about if you actually fund the schools? Give them enough money to do the job that they need to do to teach the children. But why would you want to do that? If you're a Republican, they want private schools so they can teach whatever they want without federal regulations. Now, some good news, good topics, because you got to throw that in amongst the bad. The Justins in Tennessee. Most of us have heard of them. They were expelled because they participated in a gun violence protest. Republicans, 3 Democrats participated in the protest. Republicans voted to expel the 2 black men and not the white woman. And in the state of Tennessee, the districts that these people represent can appoint someone to take that place until a special election can be held. So, of course, the districts appointed these same two, Justin Jones and Justin Pearson. They appointed them to maintain their position until they could participate in a special election. Well, that special election happened. And to no surprise, they both won. And they won by a lot. Justin Jones in Nashville defeated the Republican opponent with nearly 80% of the vote. And in Memphis, Justin Pearson defeated the Republican with more than 90% of the vote. So the Republicans' goal of kicking out progressives, black progressives, out of the caucus, or out of the Congress, backfired tremendously, because all they did was basically guarantee that these two men hold their position for a really long time. And it brought to the attention of the nation how racist the Republicans are in Tennessee. And so their whole plan, whatever it was, appears to have backfired and worked in favor of the Democrats in that position. Now I have an update. I don't remember how many videos ago I covered a story on Mississippi police officers, 6 of them who had tortured, sexually assaulted 2 black men. Well, those 6 former Mississippi law enforcement officers were charged with a total of 16 felonies stemming from the torture and rape of 2 black men. They pled guilty, and those 16 felonies include civil rights conspiracy, deprivation of rights under the color of law, discharge of a firearm during a crime of violence, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and obstruction of justice. 5 members of the Rankin County, Mississippi Sheriff's Office and 1 member of the Richland, Mississippi Police Department pleaded guilty to all charges. I was going to go over the officers, their names and ages and positions, but I decided not to. They're not worth it. Just, there's 6 officers, pieces of shit, that are finally being held accountable. So these cowards admitted to kicking down the door of the victim's home without a warrant, handcuffing and arresting them without probable cause, called them racial slurs, warned them to stay out of Rankin County. They punched and kicked them, tased them 17 times, forced them to ingest liquids, and assaulted them with a dildo. Towards the end of the ordeal, one of the cowards removed a bullet from the chamber of his weapon, forced it into one of the men's mouths, and pulled the trigger. It dry fired, so it only clicked. And then the douche racked the slide and went through the process again, only this time it fired. And it basically lacerated the man's tongue, broke his jaw, and exited out of his neck. And as you know, he survived. So he'll be alive and be around to see justice done to these cowards. So they did not provide medical care at all. Instead, they devised a cover story. They took steps to corroborate it, including planting a gun on one of the men, destroying surveillance video, spent shell casings, and taser cartridges, submitting fraudulent drug evidence to the crime lab, filing false reports, charging with crimes they did not commit, making false statements to investigators, and pressuring witnesses to stick to the story. What happened to these 2 men is horrifying. I can't imagine what they went through. I'm happy that they survived, that they're getting justice, and I hope they're getting the help they need. But this is part of a huge underlying issue with law enforcement in this country. They're not vetted well enough, they're not trained well enough, and they're too emotional. They haven't learned to control their emotions. and that has to change. There needs to be some sort of police reform. So that's what I have today. It's kind of a long video, but that's what it is. So I'll go through my spiel: like, share, subscribe, vote, no matter how big, small, inconsequential. Your vote matters, and read everything you can get your hands on. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.